videos as well. And let me know if you want me to expand the video.
That may look good if you would like to expand it.
Δεν είμαστε επιβάτες στο τρένο εμείς.
敵が聞こえてくる。それは私たちの重荷となり、今までの計り知れない人々の発生、涙、苦難を乗せて。
Αυτός είναι ο ήχος ενός τρένου.
噩耗傳聞實可哀，吊君何日果思回？無能冥目憑誰訴？有失應知悔此來。千古含愁千古恨，思鄉空對望鄉台。未酬壯志迷壤土，知以雄心死不悔。
So, let me see if I can get that to... I chose this Chinese poem because during the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese were detained sometimes up to 22 months, as I said, in the Angel Island immigration station. Chinese Exclusion Act took place 13 years after the Transcontinental was completed. During the building of the Transcontinental, Chinese workers were eagerly recruited to work on the railroad. They were sort of seen as a second kind of legalized slave labor, frankly. And by the time the Transcontinental was completed, the very people who argued for the Chinese to come into the country in droves were now arguing for them to be kept out because, of course, their labor threatened white workers. So I see the work of the Transcontinental as a paired event. It leads to Chinese exclusion. And so that's one of the reasons I chose this poem. Every single one of these characters or pairs of characters opens up into a poem, a video or a particular documentary poem about the Transcontinental. And I'll show you how it goes. And then I will ask you to tell me where you want to go. This is the first video.
Sorrowful news. Sorrowful news, sings the telegram, and Lincoln's body slides from DC to Springfield, his infant son, Willie, boxed beside him. Buffalo, Cleveland, Painesville, Ashtabula, 2 coffins, 1,700 miles, 14 days on 14 railroads. One day, a great line will unite us, the president promised. Father and son displayed capital after capital, Louisville, New Albany, Baltimore, Chicago. The black trains beach upon a tide of roses. Can you believe still in the promise of this union? I saw, General Dodge wrote, a little Negro drop on his knees and offer prayers, while above, the dark news thrums on wires, gone, 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 across poles tall as the ones from which the president ordered 38 Sioux to be hung.
One thing about this project is that every poem also comes with a note, and these notes will be published in the book. Each note is its own mini lyric essay. It's a tiny micro essay. All the notes together compose one long essay, but you can read them basically back and forth. You can read the note against the poem or all the notes together. And just to give you a sense of what the notes sound like, here's the note that accompanies Sorrowful News. Sorrowful News. Between April 21st and May 4th, 1865, the train carrying Lincoln's coffin traveled through 180 cities in 7 states. Willie, who died in 1862 at age 11 from typhoid fever, was disinterred to travel with his father back to Illinois to be buried at the family plot. Death is an invitation to return. When I was commissioned to write this poem about the Transcontinental, my first impulse was elegy. My Gungung and Popo, my maternal grandparents, could trace their lineage from Guangzhou, where the Chinese transcontinental workers immigrated from, though my own family has no relationship to the railroad. Pawpaw was born in Ellensburg, Washington in 1910, immigrating to Hong Kong, where my great-grandfather either fell ill or fled from being murdered by a rival Tong leader. She returned to America at age 18, where she met my Gungung at an Alaskan cannery. Pawpaw was American, Gungung Chinese. Born in Nambin province, my Gungung immigrated as a paper son to Chicago at age 15. A handsome man and womanizer, he married my homely Pawpaw because of her English. When he died in 1985 from pancreatic cancer, Pawpaw held an open casket funeral for him, though my mother refused to let me see his body. What do we seek from death's display? The day Lincoln's funeral train left on its tour, more than 10,000 people came to watch. The bodies of the Dakota Sioux that Lincoln ordered to be tried and convicted for war crimes they likely did not personally commit hung for less than an hour before being dumped in a mass grave. Before morning, their corpses had been excavated by physicians for medical cadavers. Lincoln's funeral car, one of the most elaborately appointed trains built in the 19th century, was purchased by Twin City Rapid Transit President Thomas Lowry in 1905. Lowry planned to rehabilitate the car, restoring it to its former glory, before he died suddenly in 1909. In 1911, prairie fires destroyed the car. Its metal couplings and window frames have yet to be discovered, the precious artifacts likely scavenged from the ashes. Okay, so here's the list of some of the topics that you can choose from, and you just tell me, shout out or put in the chat what you'd like to see. We have African-American workers, we have archaeological artifacts, biracial 19th century journalists, Chinese death rituals, Chinese descendants of the railroad workers, cholera, environmental change, gender roles on trains, hobos, immigration questionnaires, Irish Americans, labor unions, land art, Robert Smithson, Manifest Destiny, mass murder, Mormons, Native Americans, the Plains Indian War, polygamy, prostitution, photography, and the Civil War, presidential impeachment, race relations on the trains, the telegraph, and LGBTQ lives. So any of these that interest you? All right, here you come. And I should warn you, some of these things, gender roles on trains, Mormons, and polygamy. Woohoo! All right.
Do you have any requests?
LGBT.
We have a
Okay.
request in the audience for LGBT.
Okay. So a couple of things. I'm still adding some of the videos and things like that, but some might be absences, and you guys have called out for 2 absences, but that is okay because the poems are there. So I am going to CC. Da-da.
Regret. From Anthony Trollope's North America, 1862. This country reels from war. It strains beneath the weight of an excessive patriotism which compels the North to crush all those who dare rebel against the Stars and Stripes authority. Nothing is more tyrannical than strong popular feeling among a democratic people. Women, too, a certain class appear infected by it, who drag their misshapen, dirty mass of battered wireworks they call crinolines here to the station, demanding every stranger's attention and protection while haranguing any man they suspect of shying from the fight. The touch of a real woman's dress I find delicate, but these blows from a harpy's fins are loathsome. She inserts herself into the carriage, looks you square in the face, and you rise from a deference to your own convictions to give her your seat, even as men, some infirm even or aged, stand to let her pass. Some matrons even now demand a private carriage to guard, they say, their sensibilities. But I regret I've seen no delicacy in them. And why should men expose themselves to cut purses and ruffians if they are gentlemen? I wonder if the train makes some free to demand protection, when the tasks now done by men have shifted to the shoulders of women, will women themselves complain? What shall they regret when the spirit of their democracy is reshaped in the image of their grievance? At night, in the train, I watch these women rock in the oil lamp's brassy glow, our carriage gleaming with teakwood and soft leathers until, for a moment, all my companions look companionable, their faces bright, contented, whole. The train rocks, and the lady beside me drops her book. And when I bend to retrieve it, she looks up at me, her broad face blushing in the gloam. For a moment, both of us transported to some notion of our better selves. Is it sentiment or struggle that finally cements a nation? And can strong feeling, but only so, more division when the cause for it subsides, when we know we do not suffer equally on account of it? Union Station, the porter calls, and a man limps past, his cheek bisected with a livid scar. My female companion notes with melting sympathy a moment before he shrugs his traveling case close to his side, and once more the lady next to me turns her face to the window.
This is the note, regret. Anthony Trollope's North America was published nearly 30 years after his mother Fanny's best-selling Domestic Manners of the Americans appeared in England. Fanny, Frances Milton Trollope, had moved to America in 1827 to join the abolitionist Nashua commune with 3 of her youngest children, leaving Anthony behind in England with his father, a failed lawyer with larger social ambitions than his means could allow. Miserable and bullied at school, Anthony Trollope seems to have been ashamed by the social pretensions of his parents. Failure dogged the Trollope family. Fanny and Thomas's marriage foundered, and the Nashua commune collapsed after rumors began about the residents' practice of free love and interracial marriage. Fanny appears not to have engaged in interracial relationships at Nashua, though she did become intimate with the female French artist Auguste Hervieux, and after Nashua's decline moved to Cincinnati with Hervieux to open a bazaar, which failed. Fanny returned to England in 1831, where she became a hit with the publication of Domestic Manners, whose negative portrayals of Americans, which delighted the English, were not well received by Americans. Anthony Trollope's North America was a critical revision of his mother's travelogue, perhaps also a dig at the mother who abandoned him as a child. Hers, he says in his introduction, was essentially a woman's book. During her life, Fanny published 6 travelogues, 35 novels, and countless articles and poems. During his, Anthony wrote 47 novels, 1 memoir, 4 travelogues, and 6 collections of short stories. Both Trollopes were popular, both wrote for money, both were reviled by critics for the same. Trollope's best novels, in fact, are portraits of jealousy and money. He Knew He Was Right, a study of a man's sexual jealousy over his wife, and The Eustace Diamonds, a mystery about the corrupting influence of money on desire. Throughout his later novels, however, he depicted the differences between British and Americans as finally a familial dispute. Because of their closeness, he argued, it throws small differences into high relief. More unites than divides. Perhaps, he said, our 2 nations are more intimate with each other than they like. Let me see, what was the other option? Let me see. Ooh, land art, polygamy. Okay, so everyone gets 1. So branding, Mormons is a good one. Land art. Okay, I will do land art, and then I'll do LGBTQ lives. Land art. No one ever asked for this. I'm very excited about this. Is this the one? I can't read Chinese. No. Should not regret this journey. There we go.
Journey. Robert Smithson on A.J. Russell's photo of the transcontinental. This excessiveness of men spilling, crowding to mark their X of time and money, I find lamentable. Their little moment composed of paper and light, alienated spike, relic, in the hands of those willing themselves be relics too. Nothing so linear as human ego and desire, while the past turns and returns, spirals, like these pelicans journeying over the red waters off Roselle, streams of purple, sodium, yucca rhymed with pustules of dust. Each one lifts, rises, finds what only some part of the cells remembers, nests in the wreck of what we've left, this bulk of ruined train, its wheel wells turned the rust of flaking blood. Of course, they trekked the human bodies from the crash back out. We care for our own. We care nothing for our own, making our lives material so as to free us all better to forget. Who remembers the names behind that photo's grasping fingers? Who recalls the dead the UP ferried from its crash? The medals they left, not as memorial to them, but because it cost less to leave the evidence than drag it all back out.
So one thing I'll say about that is that we got a drone. We took a lot of drone footage of the transcontinental. That area is what we call the dead transcontinental. And those are all some of the ghost towns around there. So this is the note for Journey. Robert Smithson was an influential American artist and one of the founders of the land art movement, best known for his work Spiral Jetty, built on the northeastern shore of the Great Salt Lake near Roselle Point. Composed of mud, salt crystals, and basalt rock, the jetty forms a 1,500-foot long and 15-foot counterclockwise spiral curling from the lake shore. No one knows why Smithson chose Great Salt Lake to build the spiral jetty, though the most prevalent theories have to do with the transcontinental. Smithson was taken by the violet color of the lake caused by the loosened cutoff, which isolates the saline heavy waters from freshwater sources. But Smithson may also have been attracted to Roselle Point's proximity to the Golden Spike Memorial, where the Central Pacific and Union Pacific lines met, its X of connection forever stamped on the map. An X whose shadow lingers too in the visual composition of A.J. Russell's iconic handshake photo. The Golden Spike suggests linear completion, the spiral jetty unfurling in return, a rejection of progress, a revision of history. It is the act of cycling through remembrance. Driving the causeway now, the loosened cutoff takes you past both Roselle and the remains of the Bagley train wreck, in which a freight and passenger train going in opposite directions collided one early December morning in 1944. 50 people were killed, mostly military, 80 others were injured. About the meaning of his artwork, Smithson said only that through his interest in paleontology, astronomy, entropy, and mythology, he wanted to document the Earth's history. One art critic friend admits that the jetty is less interesting as history, however, than in how it disrupts the art market. The DIA Institute protects it, but no one can claim to really own it. From my truck, the horizon salinated haze blurs sky and water. A flock of birds swims past like fish. The Bagley train wreck has never been removed from the causeway because it was too expensive to remove. You can drive to it now, walk between the ruined cars. The rust resembles rock, the wheels eroding over time to sand. Over decades, the train wreck has softened into landscape, the jetty crystallized into art. And so I'm going to read What Day, which should be here, and you'll see it's empty. I'm still working on the video, and one of the reasons that this is a tough one is because once I read it to you, you'll see. And I'm thinking about the audience. I'm trying to get K through 12 students to actually see and play with this site. So anyway, this is the poem. What day? On this 7th day of the 7th month, magpies bridge in a cluster of black and white. The sky king crosses to meet his queen, time tracked by this close-knit wheeling of stars. I watch. You come to me tonight, drunk on wine and cards, nails ridged black with opium to ease the pain of work. We are all men here. Anybody can be a bridge, little raven. Your eyes squeeze shut, but not from pain. We are a trestle, a grade we build together. What matter if you say you'd never choose me, were there women willing in this desert? I chose. I choose the memory we share of rivers, your hair of smoke and raw, wet leather. A man in another man's hand makes himself tool or weapon, says the overseer, as if a man's use to another was only one of work. pleasure is our only chosen future. You are the home I briefly make, the country I can return to. Here, where the moon wheels its white shoulder in the dark as you push me to earth, slip my whiskered tip of hair into your mouth. And so you can probably see why I'm having a little issue, like what I'm going to do for the video. Let me see the note for that really quickly. What day? In his film Dirty Laundry, A History of Heroes, Canadian filmmaker Richard Fung opens with a scene of a train steward reading a magazine article with the headline, "Canada's Railway, a symbol under threat." A few shots later, this same steward is locked in an embrace with a journalist named Roger Kwong, who's traveling across the Canadian Rockies to research his family's history on the train. The two men's encounter is interspersed with historical footage of the train hurtling through tunnels, the train moving both backwards and forwards in time at once, the men's sex overlaid on the technology Kwong's family helped build. Is the train and its disruption of time where we lose or fully find ourselves? My father recalls traveling back to Seattle from his East Coast college on the Transcontinental, during which time he shared a car with a young child and her mother. One night, he woke to find the child crying, the mother gone. When he went in search of her, he found the woman in a darkened corridor, skirt hiked, legs wrapped around another passenger. "It changed my picture of women forever," my father said, disgusted. I laughed. Move your hands into the dugout dirt. You can feel the nestle of bodies, the soft silt of skin and hair. Translation of a man into labor, translation of a man into need. And what is that translation? Humiliation or rage or desire? We never stop building the railroad. I think I have time for a couple more poems. I don't want to take up all the time with reading and stuff like that. I think polygamy was one. Civil War, was that one of them? Okay, I'm gonna say it is because I just want to play it.
Homeward facing, after Hesiod works in days. When summer ceases its blister, when autumn rain cools flesh with downpour and thunder, and Mars hangs high in the sky, wheels over stretches of prairie and plain, gather your returning soldiers, men used to hardship and hunger. Make them take up axe and blade to harvest timber whose wood is free of worms. Let them hew logs for cross ties, 8 feet each. Teach them to slick lumber with creosote and hold the heavy beams upright, those 100-pound sleepers. And when the spiker comes with his ash-handled maul, tell them, look awake. Many have split arms and legs open in the wide swings of his windmilling blows. An experienced man needs only 3 strikes, but mile after mile nicks metal heads, splits handles, and wears down arms and backs and eyes. Young men are best at the work, but they can't stay the course. They care more for riches than reputation and cannot comprehend the limit of their lives. It comes down to men who tend all dangers with care. Men who've bled know the value of peace, even if they find it only in the smoke and cries of what still sounds to them like war. They do not revel in domestic delights, these warriors for whom home is gone to memory. The nation they once knew changed forever, except in the mind, the strain of old terrors that will not be quieted by any but familiar labor. And if they scrap and fight on the line, know at least this violence was held back from your cities. Such is the value of work that brings men back to themselves. This is how you make men useful after war. Now Mars fades and Sirius rises ascendant. Let your great war die in the west. Winter won't last forever.
Home gazing. Works and Days is at heart a farmer's almanac in which Hesiod instructs his conniving brother Perseus to settle down and take care of the family land. Perseus had blown through his inheritance and also stripped Hesiod of his own share by bribing the courts to gift him with the remaining family farm. Works and Days is thus both an admonishment and an attempt at fraternal healing. But Hesiod's poem might also be read as part of the story of Greek colonial expansion and conquest, as a population explosion during the 8th to 6th centuries BC created land scarcity and an anxiety over resources. Through that lens, Works and Days is a poem about suffering, strife, and ownership. Strife creates wars, Hesiod warns, and how to heal discord but through work. Lincoln, too, understood the work of the transcontinental to be stitching the nation back together after war that pitted brother against brother. And it does not surprise me that during the contentious 2020 election, then Senator Joseph Biden proposed a new high-speed rail system that would span the country. The train both unites and divides. It is the deepest, purest, most dangerous fantasy of America. The work of the railroad is the work of empire, and for America to rise again and again, it must reinvest in its fantasy of itself as renewable, progressive, flexible. We are all servants of empire one way or another. I do not exclude myself in this. The monumentality of this poem I've produced reveals that I too am empire's scribe, that in my attempt to critique the achievement, I have also celebrated it, that it would be dishonest not to celebrate what inspires at its root a kind of wonder. For if I do not choose also to celebrate, do I further erase the workers? The railroad is built of words as much as steel. I lay down another sleeper. And I'll read one poem briefly, because not all poems are videos. This is one about hobos or riders. I was taking some oral sort of interviews with people who jump trains. And this is a story that was kind of given me via one of them. Dead is what they call a torn up track whose living rails I jump to bed down in the wells and feel the thud hit every trestle steam at dawn like horses at the track I trained before the fillies foundered sick. They fired the agents vets, they fired the riders. Me, I love how in a well you thrum with sun until your bare lips start to bleed. Like canisters of oil I stole inside the train, you'll find a nation what it wants to eat and wear and what it likes to buy, a ring, a phone, some jeans, a Porsche. There is no reason why to jump a train except to lose the edges of yourself. The time like pacing Moxie at the track, that speed that almost tears your hands off at the wrist. She was the last to go, her tendon bowed and worthless than insurance. No one rides a racers just for pleasure. No one hops a train if they can take a plane, a car whose engine speed is gauged by horses kept alive in memory for sentiment. I guess there's ghosts of what we were and are. We cannot bear to leave out in the desert where I'm going home. Just not right now, I said of Moxie. Not right now before the race. She hasn't many left in her. You know, she trusts you, right? The owner said, and slipped me 2K and the shots. And all I'll say is, besides the fact that that takes up all of the energy in my body, one of the things that's quite interesting about hobos or riders now is that very few people are jumping trains. Historically, of course, that was something that people did during the Great Dust Bowl, Great Migration, things like that, where they're looking for work. But now it's a surprising number of veterans returning from war, actually. So a lot of people coming back from Afghanistan seem to be going on these trains. And one guy said it was the closest thing to the sound of war itself. I'm going to play the end and then the translation.
Not ash, not gone, but changed. Not a body erased or born of grief alone, but praise. This country made us grow each another soul, not one for earth or heaven only, but nation, electric, dangerous as a third rail. We, the middle kingdom between white and its opposites, its thousand shades of fissure, our existence would compose into a fantasy of whole. Our bodies built more than a railroad. On my 1919 map, red, black, and yellow veins trace rails lengthwise across the states, the fragile paper splitting at its seams. Like any machine, we translate the magnitude of human force to change. We're history, not silent, not invisible, not a dream. not oil, they told me. The first trains ran on steam.
And this is the translation.
We cannot count all the dead.
This is the sound of a train.
Δεν είμαστε επιβάτες στο τρένο εμείς.
指摘が聞こえてくる。それは私たちの重荷となり、今までの計り知れない人々の汗、
This is the sound of a train.
No viajamos. This is the sound.
Αυτός είναι ο ήχος ενός
You're
τρένου.
not right on the railroad.
So I'll stop there. And yeah, Chinese death rituals. I forgot to play that. So let me know if there's any questions or if there's anything you want me to explain. I still can't use my video for some reason. So
Oh, no. Paisley, I wonder if you could read the poem that was translated there for us. I don't think we saw it quite long enough to complete
oh, I'm
it.
sorry. Okay. Let me share the screen again. Yeah. The best way to do that is just, oops. There's one way I can just get to the translation. There we go.
Yeah.
And you can just shout out any questions that you have.
Any questions in the audience? One thing that I hoped, Paisley, you could talk about a little bit is what inspired you or what may have inspired you to connect particular poems and themes to the characters, or if there was any particular connection there.
Oftentimes I was interested in a particular voice and I would find something, and then I had the Chinese characters all translated before, and then I would look to see what seemed to capture the sentiment of what I had been writing about. I knew there were certain subjects that I had to hit, like the Plains Indian War. I wanted to talk about what happened to the indigenous people along the route of the transcontinental. So I knew there was going to be some stuff around that. I knew I was going to be writing a lot of stuff about Chinese workers and African-American workers and things like that. And so it was just about finding documents and then sort of letting those documents speak to me, and finding out a word that would work. If you hear something going crazy, it's my dog. A word that would kind of work for that, what I had just written. There's only one that was obvious because there was a ghost town called Terrace, and one of the actual Chinese words translates to terrace in English. So I knew that had to be about terrace. Just a thing. What are you doing? I'm not. Okay. Okay, so here's a question. Being half Chinese, how do you connect with the events of the Transcontinental Railroad, or how has it impacted you? In a way, the best way to answer that question is through a poem that I wrote. I ended up writing about this woman named Shushan Far, and I wrote in the voice of this woman, and she was Eurasian, biracial, who was a journalist in the 19th century. She rode the Transcontinental. And one of the things, if you read all of the notes together, they form an essay that is as much about the sort of issues about being biracial that I have, as much as it is about the transcontinental, the question of what unites, what divides, what brings people together, what splits families apart. And I have a note in there that talks about my mother making certain kinds of comments about me, to sort of suggest that maybe we weren't the same, or that we were the same in certain ways. Anyway, so just 1 second. No, my dog's actually eating something right in front of me. So this is the poem that I actually wrote from her point of view, that I think sort of speaks to what I saw as the transcontinental. Heart. I remember the boy who called me dirty, and the French woman who hissed pauvre petite as I passed on the street. And I remember the girl like me at school who pasted her face with white paint and blacked her brows to pass, she said, as Mexican. I remember everything for which I was made to feel ashamed. Even the fact my father said I would never make half the woman my mother was because of my heart, which the doctor now calls unusually large. Memory is the weakness I bear on my own. I come from a race on my mother's side said to be the most stolid and insensible, yet feel so keenly alive to suffering that hurts to hear the words strangers use for Chinese shopkeepers, or watch the Chinamen here laugh when I say I am of their race. I, who but for a few phrases remain unacquainted with my mother tongue. I have the name my English father gave me, and I look like my father. I could be loved if I lived as if I were like him too. But I prefer the name I have invented for myself. I want the world to see my mother and me, regardless if the Chinese have no souls. I do not need a soul. It is not my soul in question here in these hot glances, these furious whispers. Why care for love when I do not know if I should love others in return? Love is a white loneliness that swells the heart and shuts me out from pleasure. What is there for one like me to do but wander, a pioneer traveling between west and east, myself the link they threaten to destroy between them? I do not need a name on legal papers. Here is a match. Here is the mirror in which my pale face burns its flickering allegiances. My soul is everywhere on my person. I lose nothing of myself that has not already disappeared. And I guess I can share my video now. Okay, there, hi. Yay! just seconds before I have to leave. Okay, so here's a question. I worked in Ogden just up from the Union Station, and I've seen underground tunnels used to funnel alcohol and prostitutes, allegedly. Any research used from Ogden inward? Yes, I have used a fair amount of research from that area. Actually, the stuff about Mormons is entirely around the research I did around Ogden and things like that. And yeah, the West has got tons of those underground tunnels. Laramie, Wyoming also has sort of, underground tunnels so that people can go from houses of ill repute, as they used to call them, in bars, and not be seen above ground and things like that. And also the weather, let's be honest, the weather is pretty brutal up there at times. But yeah, I also have a video about prostitution, and Ogden, 25th Street had all of those great bars, and so they still have one bar that is basically used to be a whorehouse, and it keeps some of the names, the drinks, or some of the names of things you could have ordered, I guess, in that warehouse back in the day. And also Corinne, most of my information on Chinese death rituals, which are quite interesting, come from some of the small papers around the West, like Ogden and Corinne, Utah. I didn't get to talk about Chinese death rituals, but they're fascinating. Most of the Chinese who came to the country were what they called sojourners. They did not expect to stay in the country. They did not plan to emigrate or become citizens. But so what they did was they would pay a huiguan, which is a district association, to, in the event of their death, not just bury them, but dig them back up again a few months later, break up their bodies and put the bones into boxes or jars and ship them back to China. And it was such a well-known practice that small papers across the West used it as an example of why they should not allow Chinese into the country. They would say that they were filthy, they carried disease because they would, disinter their dead. And they didn't quite understand what was going on, but they would ship them out in these elaborate ways back to China. And interestingly, they went to Tunghua Hospital, which is in Hong Kong. And a lot of these bodies would have been, picked up hopefully by family members, but many of them, in fact, were not taken by family members at all. So to this day, you could go to the Tunghua Hospital and their mortuary has hundreds of these boxes still stacked up that have never been retrieved.
Wow.
So I have poems on that.
That is fascinating. Paisley, can you tell us, well, this is something I didn't actually realize, I learned strictly from this talk. How did the Lincoln funerary car end up rotting at the end of the rail?
That is a good question. I'm not entirely sure about that either. I think it was just one of those things that once they had it, they just, I don't know if they just sort of let it fall into disrepair. And that's a good question. I have no idea why it just, languished there. But that's it. There's just so many thousands of stories attached to the railroad.
It's definitely, it sounds definitely like an incredibly difficult project to put together and to imagine. And earlier in the talk this afternoon, you gave us a little bit of an insight of how you came up with this concept or the thread that tied these things together for you, or how you would tie them together. And I wonder if you could share it with our audience tonight.
So basically it was a bit of luck, because I had been thrashing around trying to figure out how to contain all of this information. And like I said, I had just been reading some of the poems from Angel Island. And when I realized that this poem, that I could use a frame poem as a kind of translation guide, it just made me feel like, oh, okay, everything is possible now, because it allowed me to organize the information in a way that allowed for readers to sort of dip in and out. And usually when you write a book of poetry, you have to think about this poem comes before this one, and this and this and this and this, and you create meaning across the whole book by sort of suggesting that there's a causal relationship between one poem and another. But because I was doing research all over the place, and because I was sort of tied to words that I didn't necessarily choose on my own, this meant that there was a certain selectivity that the poem itself created that makes it so that I think reading the poem in general allows for you to sort of create your own translation of American history from the 19th century. And I like that idea. I like that idea that there's obviously, whenever you translate a poem, you've got this sort of carefully curated loss of something, but then there's sort of a surprising gain in another way. And I think that sometimes when we write about history, or we culturally or creatively approximate it, we're doing something similar. And what I liked about the digital, more so that's my dog. That's my dog. What I like about the digital more than anything else is that it allows for that kind of readerly selectivity. It allows for, he wants to play tug of war. It allows for people to sort of, you can go in order, you can sort of dip in and out as you want to. And every time you open up a video, you've got a new way of sort of, linking to the last thing you saw. And so when you, no, No. The best part about this is I told my husband, it's like, whatever you do, could you take the dog out for a walk between this time and this time? Like, yeah, sure. So we let the dog in the backyard, and the dog has been whining all day.
Of course.
Of course. Anyway, so I mean, it just allows for that kind of, readerly engagement and choice on their own. And one of the other things that I thought was kind of interesting about is that, like, the transcontinental just changed everything about American culture. There's not one part of American life and customs, everything from race relations in public spaces and on public transportation, to the way that gender roles work, to the ways that, immigration law is going to get shaped, to migration of workers across the country, everything. Not a single part of this culture was not changed by it. And when I think about another technology that had that kind of effect, it's the internet. So I liked the idea that there was sort of a technological call and response too. Okay.
Yeah, and similarly connecting.
Yeah.
Sure. Can you hear that, Paisley?
A little bit. What's the question again?
When you mentioned earlier about a hope for K-12 to be able to access this and use it, and I'm wondering, as a K-12 teacher, and here with a student, what your hope and vision would be for how teachers and students in that space would utilize this information. What is your vision for that?
Yeah, no, what I would love to do is some of the poems obviously are far more adult. Obviously the sex poem is probably like the most adult thing. So translating that visually is going to be a bit of an issue. So it's not, it's erotic, but not necessarily explicit. But one of the things that I want students to be able to do is to, and I can share my screen again and show you some of the more truly documentary poems to take a look at. But I think it would be great to, if I were a K through 12 teacher, say, show some of the poems and to the students and allow them to, kind of play with them. And then I would have chosen, pre-selected some particular kinds of historical documents from around that same time period, and then given this to students to work as on individually or in groups to create a group project where everyone takes like a particular document, whether it's, an oral history archive that's been expurgated so that you don't have to read the whole thing, and then come up with a poem that sort of, interprets or translates that document, and then together they put it together. So I found that, working on this project, I learned so much about 19th century history. And what we have a tendency to do is to put poetry in its own special box, that poetry is there for creative personal expression, but that somehow it's not intellectual, it doesn't teach us anything. But, one of the things that I think poetry can do well is that, in the arts in general, is that if you do research and you spend a lot of time reading these sources and doing, thinking about this, you become, and then you translate it into your own creative medium, you actually get a fairly smart, nuanced way of thinking about that history, because you have to pay attention to, like, what is the language that they're using? What is the imagery that they're using? How could I translate that into something more contemporary that makes sense to a reader now? And you start becoming a very good reader, I think, of text. And I think we could use poetry more often in history classrooms and things like that, science classrooms, like, make a poem out of this, because poetry is demands close attention to something. And I'm just going to share my screen super fast again, because I want to show a particular thing that I'm talking about. So I used, let me see, is this it? Yeah. So I used the oral archives of that came from UMass Boston. They had an oral history project with African-American porters who had been working on railroads in the transcontinental as well during the 20th century. And all of these, each one of these poems is a different voice from a different person. And at the very end of the poem, you'll see the names of the characters who are speaking, the people who are speaking. And it each one took a lot of time to produce, because most people, when they tell a story, they kind of tell 5 or 6 different stories simultaneously. So if you were to do something like this with your student, I would definitely find an oral history that has been sort of selected out, so they don't have to read like 50 pages of, to figure out what the story is behind the story. But here's a couple that I just loved to play with. This guy worked for Randolph's Union and was just this story I thought was really remarkable. So I say to them, I'm a railroad man. Why can't I stay down at this $10 million YMCA they built on 44th Street? Well, they said, we ain't never had men like you up here, but I don't give a damn. This is a YMCA put up just for railroad people. I'm as good as an engineer. I'm as good as a brakeman. I'm as good as a conductor. I'm as good as the president even of the railroad. So I picked up the fight and I won that fight hands down. Oh, I had to get real radical. And you know, from that night on, I broke in there. Black railroad workers stay with comfort. They have a library, pool hall, game room. They have a cafeteria. When you open the door, that bed is spotless. I broke the same thing down in New Haven. It wasn't tough because I'd cracked New York. That's why my wife tells me, Chico, if you had stayed on the railroad, they would have killed you. And there's just, you know, things like that, like these kinds of voices that you're getting, you know, from people with their experiences. It's just, I think that's really remarkable to find these stories and stuff like that. And that would be a great exercise for students.
Thank you.
Mhm.
One other question, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
You kind of touched on it a minute ago with the question of how you came about with putting all of this together and the beauty of the interconnectedness of all of it. But my question was the catalyst originally, was it your reflective creative process that led to the audio and visual? Or did you come across some audio and visual that inspired the creative reflective process?
You know, it's a good question. For me, it was, to a certain extent, it was almost instantaneous. As soon as I got the commission, I knew I wanted to create a multimedia project. I just knew. And so the very first thing I did was create poetry videos that I would get up and perform with these videos sort of streaming behind me. And then one of the things that really struck me was that after I was done with the performance, because I was doing these during the celebration of the railroad, so only the people that were there in front of me could see and experience the poem. And I was like, I did not just work my ass off for like, 2 years for this to literally just be a moment in time that disappears. And so I was like, I needed to do it as a website. And almost as immediately, because since I knew it was taking the Chinese poem as a frame already, I already knew how the website, the architecturally had to go. So I designed the architecture and worked with a friend who is a coder. And I had in mind another project, which is very useful to consider. It's a wonderful project. It's called 88 Constellations for Wittgenstein. It's a masterful, it's a brilliant project, and you can't see it anymore because it uses Flash. And now Flash is not supported on any computer. So that was something that was really, I'd seen it way before Flash was sort of like, kicked off all these things. And so now that taught me something, which is I needed to make sure that whatever web tech I used was going to be something that wasn't going to go out of style fast and could be reconverted into something else, so that there was not actually inbuilt entropy into the project itself. Though the Robert Smithson land artist in me was sort of like, that's kind of brilliant on its own if in fact this thing degrades, because the railroad over time also degrades. But once I knew it was multimedia, and once I knew I wanted to make it accessible, and I knew it was a website, I knew it had to look like this. So that was much easier series of decisions than knowing to use the Chinese poem as the frame text. That took a lot longer to figure out. But once that clicked in, everything else fell into place.
Thank you.
No problem.
Did you say, Paisley, that you intend to further translate this into a book? Is that what you had said earlier?
Yes, it is a book. It's a book. And it'll be coming out in 2023 with Copper Canyon. And that's why I read you guys the notes, because the notes aren't published anywhere and they will only be published in the book. And one of the questions for me was, how do I translate some of the digital process of reading, the self-selectivity of digital reading, into textual work? And because, when we get onto the internet, we play, we select, we go all over the place. And you don't necessarily can do that with a book of poetry, but I think a lot of people tend to read cover to cover because that's the way we're trained to do it. And so for me, having those notes was really important because the notes themselves, as I said, each one is its own standalone essay, but all together they form another essay. And of course they speak to the poem. So you can go, in any direction you like there. But what was also important to me, and I didn't mention this before, but it is important to the book's construction. The Chinese poem that is the frame text for the thing that I've just read is actually part of a pair. There are two Chinese poems that elegize the suicide, and they were carved in such a manner so that they would reflect each other. And I make reference to that several times in the book. And I like to think that there are multiple sort of things mirroring each other. The poems mirror the essays, and the book mirrors the digital. But that's just for me. I don't know if anyone else is going to be interested in that, but for me, that was like the final formal, like, that's amazing, kind of moment. I was very pleased with that.
It has a beautiful symmetry to it. I can see why that would be important. Absolutely. Does anyone have any other questions? Anyone from our audience virtually? Well, Paisley, we have kept you for an hour, and we so appreciate, let me turn this around so that I can see you here. We so appreciate you joining us virtually and putting up with all of these technical difficulties. Thank you for sharing your amazing projects. And I hope you have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry that the dog was jumping all over the place. All right.
Yeah, it was our pleasure.
Bye.
Good evening.